Hey everyone, so I've read your comments under the Mar-a-Lago video a few days back, which made me realize something very important was left out. Somehow, I totally overlooked the unbelievable function of the ventilation tower. I don't know how I missed that, but I apologize. So sit back, relax, and stay tuned, as today we uncover the fascinating history and function of the Mar-a-Lago ventilation tower. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Now, if you haven't seen our full episode on the history of Mar-a-Lago, I recommend you start there by clicking this card. That way you'll get the complete story. But if you're short on time, here's what you need to know. Mar-a-Lago wasn't built for subtlety. In the early 1920s, Palm Beach was exploding with wealth, but nothing in the era looked quite like the vision that Marjorie Post had in mind. She didn't want just another beachfront mansion. She wanted something with presence, something that would catch the eye from land, sea, or sky. So she chose a 13-acre stretch of Florida coast where the land was so narrow that you could stand in one spot and see the Atlantic to the east and Lake Worth to the west. That alone made it extraordinary. From there, she hired Marion Sims Wyeth to design a structure that would match the drama of the setting. And what he delivered was a Mediterranean fantasy, a blend of Spanish, Moorish, and Venetian details wrapped in imported stone and terracotta tile. Rooms sprawled in every direction. No detail was too elaborate, but the house was more than just a showcase of wealth. It was built to work with the land. The walls were concrete, the foundation reinforced, and the construction's layout wasn't random. It funneled air, light, and sound in ways that made the estate feel alive. And that, my friends, is where the tower comes in. The Mar-a-Lago estate was constructed between 1924 and 1927, right at a time when air conditioning was still an expensive rarity, mostly limited to theaters and industrial spaces. For a private home, especially one as sprawling as Marjorie Post's seaside mansion was, cooling had to be built into the architecture itself. That's where the tower wasn't just decorative, it was functional engineering. The tower is about 75 feet tall, placed deliberately in line with the prevailing winds that blow across Palm Beach from the Atlantic Ocean to the Lake Worth Lagoon. And in the absence of modern HVAC systems, the design relied on the so-called stack effect, where warm air inside the home naturally rises. The tower, with its vertical shaft and upper level openings, allowed that hot air to escape further upward, creating a gentle vacuum that pulled cooler air in from the windows below. And it was this constant vertical airflow that helped circulate air through the massive house without any mechanical intervention. On top of that, the breezes moving laterally from the ocean to the lake created cross ventilation, especially through the tower's upper levels. Rooms inside it, originally bedrooms and baths, had windows on multiple sides, allowing wind to pass through and flush out the heat. Materials mattered too. The tower, like the rest of the estate, was built with dense coquina and reinforced concrete, which absorbed heat during the day and then slowly released it at night, another way to keep temperatures relatively stable inside. This wasn't some whimsical design flourish. It was a calculated response to the climate. At a time when luxury meant comfort without machines, the tower helped make Mar-a-Lago livable year-round, especially with Florida's harsh humidity. Mar-a-Lago's tower wasn't an isolated experiment. It followed a long lineage of American buildings that used height, airflow, and smart design to cool interiors before mechanical air conditioning was available. In the Deep South, plantation homes like Oak Alley in Louisiana were built with soaring ceilings and wide central hallways known as dog trouts. These features worked with the climate, pushing breezes through the center of the home and pushing hot air up and out through attic vents or cupolas. Comparably, in the Southwest, adobe homes used thick earthen walls to store heat during the day and then release it at night. Many included small ventilation openings near the roofline, allowing warm air to escape, while shaded courtyards funneled cool air in. Public buildings in the 19th century also took a more engineered approach. For example, the original Illinois state capitol, completed in the 1850s, included ventilation towers that acted as pressure relief valves, pushing rising hot air out while drawing cooler air up from the basement vents and shaded porches. And it didn't end there. Factories and institutional buildings followed the very same principles. At the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis, 19th century dormitories featured central ventilation stacks built directly into the brickwork. No fans required. The hot air simply moved out on its own, driven by the natural differences in temperature and pressure. Even lighthouses used this method. Tall stone towers weren't just visible, but they also had ventilation grates high up, where hot air could escape, making them more bearable for keepers in the summer months. So Mar-a-Lago's tower fits right into that tradition, tall enough to exhaust heat, open enough to catch crosswinds, and designed with airflow in mind from the ground up. Hence, buildings like Mar-a-Lago and all of those before it were solving problems that modern architecture is now just starting to revisit. After decades of relying almost entirely on mechanical HVAC systems, architects in the 21st century are turning back to the same principles that powered structures like Post's tower. You can see this in solar chimneys, which operate almost identically to Mar-a-Lago's tower, using the sun's heat to drive warm air up and out. In other words, just let the building breathe and let nature do the heavy lifting. So, I hope this episode brings us up to speed. I really do appreciate how engaged you guys all are, and believe it or not, I actually produce many of the episode ideas that people send in. So, if you have an idea for the channel, get in touch over on Patreon. I'd also like to thank all of our Patreon members, some of whom are named here on the screen. Otherwise, until next time, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.